Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The house still looked the same as it did a decade ago, beige siding clinging to time like an aging actor desperate for one more leading role. Wreath on the front door faded and lopsided. Plastic icicle lights that never came down since 2 Christmases ago. Jacob stood in the driveway for a full minute before turning off the ignition, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. This wasn't home. It hadn't been for a long time. But the holiday guilt was strong, and the guilt they'd mastered wielding like a dagger had cut deeper than had expected, even after all these years away. He opened the trunk and grabbed the single duffel bag he'd brought. One bag. No gifts, no decorations, not even a coat heavier than a hoodie, not because he forgot, but because he had no intention of staying longer than 2 nights. Maybe just one if the old ghosts came crawling fast enough. Frank opened the front door before Jacob could knock. He didn't step outside, just stood there like a gatekeeper. No hug, no smile, just a nod and a quiet grunt. Jacob stepped past him with a "Hey, Dad," already regretting this whole charade. Linda was in the kitchen pretending to be busy. She had 3 pots going and a bowl of cranberry sauce that still had the grocery store lid on it. She wiped her hands on a towel, kissed him too quickly on the cheek, and said, "You finally decided to visit. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten where we live." "I didn't forget. Just got busy," Jacob said, setting his bag down by the stairs. She replied, turning back to the stove with that smile people wear when they're holding back something sharp. "Too busy to call your mother, but not too busy to fly to London and post it all over your social media." Frank chuckled from the living room. "That's what people do now, Lynn. Post their breakfast online and call it a career." Jacob didn't respond. He knew this game. He'd been playing it since high school. The rules were always the same. Smile politely, let the comments roll off, and don't ask for anything unless you want to owe them for the rest of your life. Bethany showed up an hour later, perfectly on time as always, with her husband Rick and their 2 overly polite kids. They brought gifts for everyone, even Jacob, who tried to wave it off but was handed a mug that said "World's Okayest Brother." It was a joke, sure, but one that didn't feel particularly funny. Dinner was the same mix of tension and forced cheer as every other family holiday. The ham was dry, the potatoes undersalted, and the conversation ping-ponged between local gossip, politics no one fully understood, and thinly veiled critiques of Jacob's life choices. Frank leaned back in his chair with a glass of cheap whiskey and said, "So, are you still doing that tech thing? What is it again? Websites? Apps? Games?" He said the word apps like it tasted bad in his mouth. Jacob stabbed a piece of carrot with his fork. "Yeah, it's still software. Mostly security systems now. AI infrastructure." Frank let out a low whistle. "Well, I don't know what any of that means, but I guess someone's gotta do it. Long as it pays the bills." Linda cut in, "Speaking of which, how's your apartment in Seattle? Still living in that little 1-bedroom? Doesn't seem like a man your age should be renting." Bethany looked down at her plate, and Rick sipped his wine awkwardly. The kids had long since been excused to the living room. Jacob offered a tight smile. "It's a condo. I own it." "Oh, well, good," Linda said, voice bright and brittle. "I just thought maybe you'd be settling down by now. You're not getting any younger. That girl you were seeing a while back, what was her name? Chelsea?" Clara, Jacob replied, voice flat. "We broke up a year ago." "Well, that's too bad," Frank said, already moving on. "Guess not everyone's cut out for relationships. Some people are just different." And there it was. The subtle jab, the insinuation, the dance of disapproval that was more exhausting than any shouting match could ever be. Jacob nodded, took another sip of water, and let the words pass like smoke over stone. After dinner, they all gathered in the living room, pretending the meal hadn't been a battlefield. Linda handed out mugs of cider that no one asked for, and Frank put on one of those holiday movies they watched every year, some black and white nonsense about a man learning the value of life. Jacob watched the screen without seeing it, his mind elsewhere. At one point, Linda walked past and muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "We didn't have to invite you, you know. You should be grateful we even let you stay here." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because they were new, but because they weren't. They echoed every Christmas morning when his stocking was mysteriously half full. Every teenage argument that ended with slammed doors and the phrase, "under my roof." Every holiday card they sent that addressed him last, after Bethany and the grandkids. He looked at Linda, but she was already walking away. She dropped the grenade and moved on like it was nothing. Jacob's hands clenched in his lap. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Bethany caught his eye. For a second, it looked like she was going to say something, maybe even defend him. But then she looked away, tucked her feet under her, and said nothing. Frank, barely glancing over from the recliner, added, "You're lucky we didn't book the guest room for Ron again. He asked, you know. Said he'd love to spend Christmas here. We told him family comes first." Jacob stared at the flickering TV screen, the fake snow falling on black and white actors smiling through a script someone else had written. In that moment, he realized just how scripted this whole evening was. The decorations, the smiles, the stories. None of it was for love. It was all tradition, hollow and mechanical. He got up, walked quietly upstairs, and closed the door to his old bedroom. The posters were gone, the walls painted over, but the air still smelled the same, stale, like neglect and forgotten memories. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out his phone, and opened a familiar app. His fingers hovered over the screen. He hadn't planned to do anything. Not really. But something inside him had shifted. He wasn't 17 anymore. He didn't need their permission to breathe. He opened his laptop. Tomorrow, they'd learn what it really meant when the failure of the family decided he'd had enough. When Jacob was 9, he got a certificate from school that said "Most Curious Mind" in bright crayon colors, laminated between two pieces of plastic with his name spelled wrong, but his grin as wide as the Mississippi. He brought it home in his backpack, smoothed it out on the dinner table, and waited for someone to say they were proud. Frank barely looked up from his newspaper, grunted, and said, "Curiosity didn't get a man through war. Discipline did." Linda gave a tight-lipped smile that smelled more of obligation than pride and said, "Don't let it go to your head, Jacob. Humility pleases the Lord." Then she added, as she always did, "You don't want to turn out like those city boys who think they're smarter than God." Bethany was sitting right there, eating mashed potatoes with both hands, and even at 6, she knew not to make a sound during one of those dinners. It wasn't a bad house. Not on the outside. It had a big backyard, a working garage, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind picked up just right. But on the inside, things were spoken in tones instead of words, in sideways glances and door slams, and long Sunday mornings spent praying for forgiveness for feelings no child should be ashamed to have. Jacob learned early that love in that house came with a price tag he couldn't afford: obedience without question, faith without doubt, and silence in the face of injustice, especially when it came from someone who claimed to be family. Frank had served in the army and came back with medals and opinions that no one was allowed to challenge. He kept his emotions locked down tighter than the gun safe in the basement, and he expected the same from his son. Crying was weakness. Anger was rebellion. Curiosity was dangerous. Jacob, naturally inquisitive and emotionally open, became a problem before he even hit double digits. Linda would send him to his room with a Bible verse tucked under his pillow and tell him to ask for the Lord's patience, not his father's approval. But Jacob didn't want a divine answer. He wanted a human one. He wanted to know why he felt wrong just for existing the way he was. Bethany, on the other hand, was golden from the moment she was born. She had the same eyes as Linda and the same stubborn jaw as Frank, which somehow made her all right in ways Jacob could never be. She didn't ask too many questions, always did what she was told, and learned how to pray out loud with just the right tremble in her voice to make Linda's eyes tear up every Christmas Eve. By the time she was a teenager, she could say grace at the table and get a standing ovation. Jacob once tried the same thing, stumbled on a verse from Corinthians, and Frank barked, "Don't recite scripture if you can't respect it." He started building things in secret circuits, small programs, even a makeshift weather sensor in the garage that Frank dismantled with a laugh, calling it a nerd's toy. Jacob stopped showing them what he was proud of, stopped expecting applause. He took that fire inside him and buried it beneath hours of code, books stolen from the library, and long nights dreaming of a place where being different wasn't something you had to apologize for. By senior year, he'd taught himself more than the school's computer science teacher, built a basic cybersecurity protocol that actually caught a phishing attempt at the school's network, and won a state-level innovation award. He didn't tell his parents. They found out when a neighbor mentioned it at church, and Linda cornered him in the kitchen that Sunday afternoon, asking why he'd gone behind their backs. "We could have helped you prepare," she said, "but maybe you didn't want your family involved. Maybe you think we hold you back." He wanted to say yes, but he didn't. He just went in his room, closed the door, and kept building. When he left for college on a partial scholarship, he packed in silence. Frank didn't help load the car. Linda cried, but it was the kind of crying you do when something escapes your control, not when your heart breaks. Bethany stood by the mailbox, said goodbye, and offered a small smile that said more than she realized. She didn't know what it was like to leave because you had to, not because you wanted to. She still believed that leaving was a betrayal, not survival. In college, Jacob bloomed in the dark. He studied until his eyes burned, worked 2 jobs, started a business with a roommate, and watched that business tank. Then built another. And another. It took him 10 years to climb out of the emotional wreckage his childhood left him in, and even then, there were scars. The kind people don't see unless they know what to look for: the way he tensed when someone raised their voice, how he apologized too quickly, how he never asked for help because he was taught that asking made you weak. Success didn't heal him. It just made the silence louder. Because no matter how far he got, there was a part of him that still ached for someone to say, "You did good, Jacob. I'm proud of you." Not because it was expected, but because it was true. Have you ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family? What would you have done in Jacob's place? Let me know below, because this story isn't as simple as it seems. Back in the present, Jacob sat at the small desk in the guest room, which still had a lace doily on the chair like it was 1983. The laptop glowed in the dim light as he stared at the screen, finger hovering over the keys. His eyes flicked to the corner of the monitor, a familiar program open in the background, a dashboard no one else in that house even knew existed. A few clicks, a password only he would remember, and he was inside. Lines of numbers, account names, familiar addresses. He didn't do anything yet. But the silence in the house, the weight of that final jab, "You should be grateful we even let you stay here," echoed louder than any shout ever could. And Jacob, for the first time in years, didn't feel like the little boy begging for a place at the table. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, finally ready to decide whether to jump or let the whole damn thing collapse behind him. The day after Christmas always had a strange kind of heaviness in that house, like a stage after the curtain dropped, tinsel still hanging limp from the ceiling, half-drunk glasses of cider on end tables, and the echo of laughter that felt more like an act than a memory. Jacob had always hated December 26th more than Christmas itself. Because at least Christmas had structure, had rules, had things to do. But the day after? That was when the masks started to slip, just a little, and everyone sat around trying not to notice how uncomfortable they really were in each other's company. He woke up early, earlier than he wanted to, with that same tight feeling in his chest he used to get before school on Mondays. The house was quiet except for the soft clink of Linda moving dishes in the kitchen, pretending to clean while already planning what version of the story she'd tell her church group. The version where Jacob came home, and they had a wonderful time as a family, The version where Frank said grace and nobody noticed the resentment simmering just beneath the mashed potatoes. Jacob stepped downstairs barefoot, the floor cold against his skin, and went straight for the kitchen. Linda looked up from the sink with that painted-on smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Morning, honey. There's leftover pie if you want something sweet for breakfast." She always offered pie the morning after a fight. It was her version of an apology, coated in sugar and laced with denial. "No thanks," Jacob said, voice flat but polite. He reached up into the cabinet for a coffee mug, pulling down the nearest one, an old ceramic thing with a faded cartoon snowman and a chip on the rim. Linda's head snapped toward him before he even turned around. "Not that one," she said sharply, stepping forward with her hands still wet from the sink. "Those are the good mugs. We use those for company." Jacob blinked once, then looked at the mug in his hand, then back at her. The absurdity of it hit like a quiet slap, the idea that after everything, even now, he still wasn't considered company worth serving properly. He placed the mug back on the shelf, slowly, methodically, and pulled out a cracked white one with a faded logo from some car dealership. It wasn't about the mug, not really. It never was. He made coffee in silence while Linda moved around him like a polite storm cloud, wiping surfaces that were already clean, humming hymns under her breath as if she could scrub away tension with bleach and Beth Moore lyrics. From the living room, Frank's low snore rumbled through the house, reminding Jacob that last night's whiskey hadn't been his first pour of the evening. Bethany had gone home early the night before, citing a migraine, but Jacob had seen it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet scream trapped behind her well-kept smile. She had learned how to keep it together, learned better than him how to bury disappointment beneath performance. She played the role of the good daughter so well, he sometimes forgot she was acting. But that didn't mean she wasn't also bleeding. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen, and Jacob sipped from the cheap mug like it was holy water. He walked back upstairs without a word and sat at the small desk again, his laptop still open, the screen still glowing faintly from where he'd left it. No one had noticed. No one ever asked what he was working on. They didn't think he did anything that mattered. He clicked a few tabs over, opened a program only he could access, and entered a password that would mean nothing to anyone in that house. The interface was sleek, simple, and cold, like the opposite of the home around him. Lines of account balances, access rights, fund dispersal records all lit up on the screen like tiny digital skeletons. A quiet empire he had built piece by piece, in their name, behind the scenes, with no thanks and no expectation of acknowledgement. Years ago, when Frank's pension had nearly vanished after a bad investment, Jacob had stepped in. Silently. He moved funds, rerouted savings, created a legal trust to protect them from their own recklessness. He made sure Linda would always have enough for her ridiculous tithes and hobby donations, that Bethany could dip into the emergency fund if her husband's job fell through again. And he never once told them, because he knew they'd never say thank you. And part of him, back then, hadn't needed them to. But now he wasn't so sure. He stared at the Family Trust Access tab for a long time. The cursor blinked, patient and expectant. His hand hovered over the mouse, and then he clicked. A new window opened, asking for a confirmation. He typed in the override code, hit enter, and watched as the screen shifted from green to gray to blue, then back to green again. It was done. The accounts were frozen. Access denied. No warnings sent. No errors to trigger alerts. Just a quiet, complete lockout that only he could reverse. If they went to use a card, it would be declined. If they logged into online banking, it would stall. Not because he wanted to see them suffer, but because for once, just once, he wanted them to feel what it was like to depend on someone who didn't owe them a damn thing. He zipped up his duffel bag slowly, folding his clothes with deliberate care, as if every motion was a decision. He looked around the room, one last time, at the wallpaper that hadn't changed since high school, the crooked shelf that still held a dusty plastic trophy from his 8th grade science fair, and the bed that had always been just slightly too short for his legs. Downstairs, Linda was still humming. Jacob walked to the top of the stairs and paused, fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. By the time they realized what had happened, he would already be gone, not just from the house, but from the script they'd forced him to read all these years. No longer the black sheep. No longer the disappointment. Just a man who finally stopped asking for permission to exist. And somewhere in a quiet room across town, the screen glowed green. Jacob didn't leave the driveway in a rush, didn't slam his car door, didn't even look back at the house as it stood in the cold morning light like some fossilized version of a family home that had never truly been one. He drove slow, methodically, the way he did when his mind was full and his heart too heavy to acknowledge the weight of it all. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years, not since the night he watched his startup burn through its last dollar and realized no one in his family even knew it existed. Back then, when he had nothing but student debt and a coffee-stained mattress, he still sent Linda money for the church's building fund, still made anonymous payments on Frank's overdue car note, still wired Bethany $2,000 the week after Rick lost his job and their heat got shut off during a snowstorm. No one ever asked where the money came from. No one ever thought to ask. Because they preferred to believe the lie, that they were stable, self-reliant, God-fearing, salt-of-the-earth people who didn't need help from anyone, least of all from the weird son who'd left home and never looked back. When the stock market dipped in 2016 and Frank's retirement fund got cut in half, it was Jacob who stepped in, created a shell trust, and moved his own money into an account labeled Miller Security Holdings, something vague and authoritative enough to pass as an investment vehicle. He never told them he owned it. He let them believe it came from some forgotten pension, some old government payout they didn't remember filing for. When Linda couldn't afford the property taxes in 2019, it was Jacob who wired the payment directly to the county, made the letterhead look like it came from a community preservation grant, and even forged a congratulatory letter that she framed and hung in the hallway. She would point it out to guests during her monthly prayer group like it was a miracle from heaven, and Jacob never corrected her, never claimed the credit, because some part of him, the part that still wanted her to love him the way she loved Bethany, thought maybe this would finally make him enough. But it never did. Bethany had always been the golden child, but even golden children bleed when no one's watching. She wasn't cruel, not exactly, but she carried the family myth on her shoulders like a crown she didn't ask for. When she called Jacob crying 3 years ago, whispering that Rick had taken out a second mortgage without telling her and maxed out 2 credit cards on some half-baked investment, Jacob didn't hesitate. He wired $10,000 the same day, no questions asked. She promised she'd pay him back. She never did. And Jacob never brought it up, because family doesn't charge interest. At least, that's what they always said when he needed something growing up. So when Jacob clicked that button and froze everything, the mortgage buffer, the fake pension, the emergency reserves, even the quarterly disbursements he'd automated to look like government subsidies, he didn't do it out of rage or revenge. He did it because the silence had grown louder than the debt. Because every dollar he gave was another thread in a web that kept him stuck in a narrative that never allowed him to be the man he became. They didn't just ignore what he gave, they twisted it into something they were owed. He pulled into a quiet strip mall parking lot, sat in the car with the engine running, and opened his laptop again. The dashboard pulsed softly, the green glow of completion humming across the screen like a heartbeat. He double-checked the status. All access, revoked. All accounts, locked. Notifications, none. Just like he designed it. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a gas station cup and watched the sun creep over the horizon like a slow revelation. His phone buzzed against the dashboard, but he didn't reach for it at first. He let it ring once, twice, then flipped it over and answered. Jacob, Bethany's voice came through loud and cracked with panic. What the hell did you do? He didn't speak right away. He could hear movement in the background. Her kids, maybe. Rick shouting something muffled. Bethany rarely called in that tone. She was the composed one, the buffer between chaos and presentation. If her mask had cracked, it meant the damage had landed fast. What are you talking about? Jacob said, calm as glass, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted her to say it out loud. Mom just called me, Bethany snapped. Her debit card got declined at the grocery store. She tried logging into their bank account, and it's all locked down. Dad's trying to call the bank now, but everything's frozen. What did you do? Jacob inhaled through his nose, slow and deep. I paused the trust. Temporarily. What trust? She asked, and there was a pause, not the silence of confusion, but the silence of realization, because somewhere deep down she already knew. Jacob, is this from you? You've been funding them. Yes, he said simply. For years. The line went quiet except for Bethany's breath. Then, a long exhale. Why now? Why would you do this now? Because, Jacob said, choosing his words carefully, they told me I should be grateful they let me stay. And I realized they still don't know who I am or what I've done for them. They just take. And they pretend like they built this on their own. Bethany said nothing for a while. Then, you should have told me. You should have told us. I did, Jacob replied. Every time I answered your calls. Every time I sent money and didn't make you ask twice. I told you the only way I knew how. She sighed again, softer this time. They're freaking out, Jacob. You need to fix this. No, he said, not cold, but resolute. They need to understand it was never theirs to control. A car pulled into the spot next to him, an old pickup with a dented fender and a Christmas tree air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror. Jacob watched it idly, as if the world outside his window had somehow become clearer now that the truth had finally cracked open. I'll unlock your access, he added. You can have your emergency fund. I know you need it. But I'm not opening theirs until we talk. All of us. For real this time. Bethany didn't argue. Not immediately. That was the thing about her. She was pragmatic before she was emotional. They're going to lose it. They already have, Jacob said quietly. They just haven't figured it out yet. The call ended without goodbye. Jacob stared at his reflection in the laptop screen, the faint lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked like his father and nothing like him at the same time. He closed the laptop and waited for the storm. The Airbnb Jacob had rented was about 15 minutes from the old house, tucked behind a local coffee shop and a dying antique bookstore, both of which had likely been around longer than anyone remembered or cared to admit. The apartment itself wasn't much: laminate floors, second-hand furniture, an oversized clock that ticked too loudly and never quite kept the right time, but it was his space. No one else's voice echoed through the walls, no one told him which mugs to use, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jacob could breathe without holding his chest like it might collapse. He wasn't expecting anyone. In fact, after the call with Bethany, he half expected her to go radio silent for a while, to let the storm gather itself before returning to its usual pressure. But by late afternoon, there was a knock at the door, not sharp or angry, just a simple, three-part rhythm that he instantly recognized from childhood. Bethany used to knock on his bedroom door that same way when they were kids, whenever she wanted to borrow a book or hide from their parents' latest passive-aggressive standoff. When Jacob opened the door, she stood there in a long coat, eyes rimmed red but dry, a Starbucks cup clutched too tightly in one hand and her phone in the other like it might bite her. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped past him like someone returning to a place they didn't know they missed. I didn't tell them I was coming, she said, looking around the space. I told Rick I needed some air. Jacob shut the door and leaned against it for a second, watching her. Is this air? Bethany gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's cleaner than over there. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her coat still on, her shoulders hunched in a way that reminded Jacob just how much she'd been carrying all these years and how little space she'd ever had to put it down. The golden child, the dependable one, the perfect daughter. The crown looked pretty until you realized how sharp it was underneath. "I'm not here to fight," she said softly. I don't know, Jacob. I'm tired. Really tired." He made coffee, the same way he always did, strong, black, silent. No small talk. He handed her the mug without comment, and she held it between her hands like it was the only warmth she'd felt in weeks. "They think you're the problem," she said after a while, voice small. "They always did. You were the rebel. The ungrateful one. The one who left." "I was," Jacob said. "And I did." Bethany looked up at him, her expression not angry, but desperate. "But they never saw what it took out of you. Or what it took out of me to stay." Jacob didn't move, didn't speak, because that was the thing. She had stayed. While he built distance, she built compliance. And now both of them were exhausted in completely different ways. "I had to be perfect," Bethany continued. "Every test, every recital, every stupid Christmas pageant. I had to smile. Always smile. Because if I slipped, even once, they'd see I wasn't you. And that terrified me more than anything." Jacob sat down across from her, the coffee warming his palms. "You were their everything." "No," she said quickly, almost bitterly. "I was their reflection. I had to be. And every time you pushed back, every time you challenged them or walked away or asked hard questions, they looked at me like it was my job to be the balance. Like I had to make up for your freedom by being even more obedient." There was silence for a while. Not awkward. Just heavy. "I envied you," she finally admitted, looking down. "Even when you were broke. Even when you left. Because you got out. You got to be angry. You got to live." Jacob stared at her, unsure of what to say. All those years, he thought she had it easier. Thought she had the love he never got, the praise, the acceptance. And maybe she did, but the price had been higher than he ever guessed. "I wanted to be you," she whispered. "Even when I hated you." Jacob stood up, walked over to his laptop, and opened it without a word. The dashboard blinked awake instantly, all those frozen accounts waiting like trapped ghosts behind digital bars. Bethany's emergency fund was listed clearly, her name just beneath it, untouched since the freeze. "I can unlock yours," he said, not as a threat, not even as a gesture. Just a fact. Right now. Bethany stood, walked over to the desk, and looked at the screen. "Do you think I came here for that?" she asked. "I don't know why you came," Jacob replied. She hesitated, then reached over and closed the laptop slowly. "Maybe I came because I was finally allowed to stop performing." And then 3 loud, angry knocks rattled the door, no rhythm this time, no softness, just fists and fury. Jacob didn't have to guess. Bethany looked at the door, then at him. "He followed me, didn't he?" Another knock, harder now. A voice shouted through the wood. "Jacob, you open this damn door right now." Jacob didn't move. Bethany didn't either. Then Frank's voice, slurred and furious. What kind of man punishes his own blood? And in that single moment, standing beside the sister who was no longer performing and facing the father who never stopped pretending, Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Not exactly peace. Not yet, but maybe the first breath of it. He didn't answer the door. Not yet. The knocking didn't stop until Jacob opened the door, and by then, the moment for rational words had already passed. Frank stood in the hallway of the Airbnb with his coat unzipped and crooked. His cheeks flashed red from cold and whiskey, his breath fogging in bursts that matched the rhythm of his fury. His eyes, once the color of cool steel, now looked cracked and dulled by a kind of tiredness that didn't come from age alone. Behind him, the parking lot was quiet, a thin sheet of sleet coating the ground, the air heavy with unsaid things waiting to erupt. Jacob didn't say anything at first, just held the door open without stepping aside, making it clear this wasn't an invitation, just a test to see whether his father would cross the threshold unasked, as he always had. Frank stepped in anyway, like he owned the place, like personal space was just a theory other men worried about. Bethany stood near the table, her arms crossed, eyes locked on the floor, refusing to engage but unwilling to leave. She didn't want to witness it, but she wasn't going to run from it either. Frank's voice, low and sharp, sliced the air without hesitation. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Jacob?" Jacob closed the door behind him with calm deliberation, not slamming it, not flinching, protecting what's mine. Frank's laugh came out jagged, not amused but startled, like hearing a joke in a language he didn't understand. "What's yours? You think you built this family? You think money makes you the damn patriarch?" Jacob didn't take the bait, not directly. He moved past Frank, poured himself a glass of water from the tap, took a long sip, then finally turned. "I don't think I built this family. I think I've been holding it up." Frank took a step forward, his fists tightening at his sides, but he didn't swing, not physically. That wasn't his style. He swung with words: shame, control, silence. "You've always been a damn child," Frank growled. "Running from hard work, from structure. Now you sit behind a computer and play God with people's lives." Jacob didn't move, didn't blink. "You're mad because you lost control. That's what this is." Frank's jaw twitched. "I did what I could for this family. I worked, I provided. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but I kept you fed. I kept a roof over your head. You kept a roof over a house," Jacob said coldly, "not over a home." Bethany made a small sound, maybe a sob, maybe just breath catching in her throat, and Frank turned toward her like she'd betrayed him by not taking his side fast enough. "This is what you wanted," he asked her. "For your brother to humiliate us? To freeze us out like we're some leeches?" Bethany finally looked up, her face pale but resolute. "No, Dad. I just wanted you to listen for once." Frank's gaze snapped back to Jacob. "And you ungrateful little—" Jacob cut him off before he could finish, his voice low and sharp as glass. "Don't say I'm ungrateful. Don't you dare. I spent 37 years trying to earn your approval. I sent you money without you asking. I protected your name. I protected Mom's damn pride. I made sure you could live like nothing ever fell apart. And all I ever wanted was for you to see me." Frank's shoulders dropped just slightly, like some piece of armor had slipped loose. He looked older then, smaller somehow, not the giant Jacob feared as a child, but a man whose foundation had cracked. "I never knew how to love you," Frank said finally, voice hoarse. "You weren't like me. I didn't know what to do with you." Jacob let the words settle for a moment, the honesty of them more jarring than any insult. "Then why pretend like I was the one who failed?" he asked. "Why make me beg for scraps of affection and call it discipline?" Frank opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the phone in his coat pocket buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and winced. "It's your mother," he muttered, and he answered with a strained, "Yeah." The voice on the other end was unmistakable Linda's, cracked and sobbing, desperate in a way that was more about appearances than pain. "Frank, you have to fix this. The ladies are supposed to come for Bible study tonight, and I can't even write a check for the potluck. What do I tell them? That my son has frozen us out like criminals." Frank held the phone out toward Jacob as if he didn't know what to do with it. "She's breaking down." Jacob didn't move to take it. "She's not breaking down. She's reacting to losing the only currency she knows: control." Frank pressed the phone back to his ear. "Linda, I'll call you back," he said, and ended the call. The room fell silent again. Bethany wiped her eyes, stepped back, her voice low. "I'm going home." She didn't wait for permission or a goodbye, just grabbed her keys and walked out, the door clicking softly behind her. Frank stared at Jacob for a long time, and when he finally spoke, the words landed like stones. "You should be grateful we even let you stay here." Jacob met his gaze without hesitation. "I was," he said, voice flat. "Not anymore." They stood in silence for another minute, Two men on opposite sides of a battlefield built from decades of quiet wounds and too loud expectations. Frank didn't speak again. He turned, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Jacob stood in the quiet, the ticking clock on the wall finally catching up to the right time, each second stretching like a choice. He grabbed his coat, his laptop, his bag, started the car, drove, and at the stop sign just past the turn for the freeway, he paused longer than he needed to, staring in the rearview mirror at the road that led back to the house, to the family, to the mess. His hand hovered near the turn signal. For one moment, just one, he almost turned back. The snow was falling lightly by the time Jacob reached the edge of town, not the kind of snow that demanded attention, but the quiet sort that blanketed rooftops and cars like forgotten dust, slow and undisturbed. He had no plan, no real destination. He just knew he couldn't go back to the house. Not yet, not while his pulse still echoed with his father's final words and his mother's voice still rang in his ears like a church bell too long ignored. He found himself driving toward the old storage unit on the south end of town, the one he kept under his name with a code no one else knew, filled with boxes that hadn't been touched in years. He hadn't intended to stop there, but something in his gut pulled him off the highway and into the dim-lit gravel lot lined with rusted roll-up doors and security cameras that didn't work. He punched in the 6-digit code, his childhood address, and stepped inside, the familiar metallic scent of cardboard and age greeting him like an old friend. There, among the boxes labeled college, winter coats, and random tech stuff, was one marked only with his full name in capital letters, handwritten in black marker, and he hadn't written it. It took him a second to recognize the handwriting, the slightly shaky strokes, the way the letters leaned slightly to the left. It was Grandma May's. Jacob pulled the box down gently, carried it to the little folding table in the corner of the unit, and opened it with the kind of reverence reserved for things long buried. Inside were old photos, a few newspaper clippings, 2 of his high school art projects he had assumed were thrown out, and, at the bottom, a bundle of letters tied with fraying twine. His breath caught the second he touched them. The letters weren't addressed, but the first one started plainly, Jacob. He unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the page like it might disappear if he read too fast. I wanted to send this after you left, but your mother said you didn't need distractions. I think she meant well, but I also think she's been too proud to admit when she was wrong. I don't know what happened between you all, but I saw you. Even when they didn't. I saw how hard you tried to smile, how you watched your sister take their love like a sip from a well you couldn't reach. And I want you to know not everything they called weakness was weakness. Some of it was strength they didn't understand. He stopped reading and closed his eyes. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting on the porch swing with May while the others argued inside over who left the back gate open. She would hum old hymns and rub circles on his back, always quiet, never confrontational, but somehow more present than either of his parents ever were. She never defended him aloud, never shouted in his name, but now he realized maybe she wasn't silent after all. Maybe she just didn't trust that words spoken would be heard. He opened another letter, dated the week he left for college. I heard you got into school, even got a scholarship. I'm proud of you, whether they said it or not. I know they wanted something else for you, something simpler, something safer, but that's not your fault. Some people don't know how to raise a child who dreams bigger than they ever did. And then another, years later, with a single line that cut deeper than any others, I worry they'll only understand who you are after you're gone. Jacob folded the letters back with shaking hands, eyes stinging but dry, jaw clenched to hold back the wave rising in his chest. All these years, he thought no one had seen him, not really, not the late nights, not the isolation, not the quiet, invisible victories. But someone had. And though she'd never mailed the words, she'd written them, and in doing so, had given him the one thing he never thought he'd find in the wreckage of that family, proof that his pain wasn't imagined. He sat for a long while in the cold metal chair, the wind humming against the storage door like a lullaby. Then he pulled out his laptop. The dashboard blinked awake instantly, a soft mechanical hum grounding him in the present. All accounts still locked. Status unchanged. He hadn't even touched it since the confrontation. The screen glowed softly in the dark, a quiet reminder of the control he still held. His finger hovered over the Restore Access button, the cursor pulsing gently like a heartbeat. He thought about his father's words, sharp and calloused, about Linda's disappointment framed as devotion, about Bethany's tired honesty, about the years of resentment layered like paint over drywall that never quite cured. But then he thought of May, of those letters, of the way she said, "I saw you," like it mattered more than anything else. Maybe it wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. Maybe it wasn't even about peace. But maybe it was about no longer needing to prove he could hurt them back. His finger moved slightly, not a click, not yet, but something softened in him, just enough to open the door to possibility. The cursor still hovered. He stared at it in silence. And in the middle of that small, dusty storage room where forgotten things were meant to stay, Jacob wondered if holding the power was ever going to feel better than finally letting it go. The call came just after midnight, when the world outside had gone still and the cold had settled into the bones of the town, creeping into window frames and wrapping itself around porch rails like a ghost too tired to haunt. Jacob was sitting in the dark, his laptop still open but untouched for hours, the Restore Access tab glowing quietly, waiting for a decision he didn't know how to make. He hadn't slept. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to anymore. Sleep meant release, and he didn't feel like he had the right to release, not yet, not with so many loose threads still pulling at him from every direction. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was Bethany again, or maybe Frank, dialing in for another round of misplaced rage. But it buzzed again, and when he finally turned it over, he saw the name, Mom. He let it ring 3 more times before he answered. Her voice didn't sound like it usually did, didn't carry the sing-song sweetness she used for church ladies or the tight, breathy guilt she used when she wanted something without asking directly. It wasn't the rehearsed pitch of a woman who built her identity on perfection, or the clipped irritation of someone perpetually disappointed in the world around her. Instead, her voice sounded small, bare, stripped of performance like old wallpaper peeled down to plaster, raw and crumbling at the edges. "I don't know how to start this," she said, and Jacob stayed silent, giving her space to try. "I didn't call to yell," she added quickly, as if afraid he might hang up. "I didn't call to beg either." He waited, heart steady but cautious, knowing full well the difference between a confession and a manipulation could be a single word, or even just a pause in the wrong place. "I talked to Bethany," Linda continued. "She told me about what you said, about why you did it." Jacob stared at the laptop screen, cursor still blinking like a heartbeat on pause. "She said you think we never saw you," she said. "That we never loved you the way you needed to be loved." He exhaled slowly. "That's not what I think. That's what I lived." She was quiet for a moment, and he could hear the breath catch in her throat before she spoke again. "I didn't know how to love you, Jacob. That's the truth. You were always different. You felt things deeper. You asked questions I didn't have answers for. And every time I didn't know how to reach you, I shamed you instead. Because I thought that's what would make you stronger. I thought that's what love was supposed to do." He didn't respond. Not because he didn't have words, but because none of them seemed big enough for the ache that had lived in him for decades. "I know you don't owe us anything," she said quietly. "I know you're not doing this to punish us, even if it feels that way. I know you built something real, something strong, and you did it without our help." There was something in her voice now that wasn't performance, not guilt, not shame, just tiredness. Not the tiredness of being inconvenienced, but the deeper exhaustion that came from facing yourself in the mirror and not liking what stared back. "I've been trying to be a good mother my whole life," she said. "But I think maybe I was just trying to look like one. And now I don't know how to fix that." Jacob closed his eyes. He remembered the way she used to brush his hair back roughly when he cried, telling him boys didn't get to fall apart. The way she'd praised Bethany for sitting still in church, then told him he had ants in his spirit when he squirmed in the pew. He remembered Christmas mornings where he watched her light up at Bethany's every word while he sat in silence, hoping his stocking might finally be full. And now here she was, older, smaller somehow, finally admitting that maybe it hadn't been enough. "Do you want me to fix it?" Jacob asked. "Is that why you called?" "No," she whispered. "I called to say I'm sorry, even if it's too late." He didn't say anything for a long while, just listened to the quiet breathing on the other end of the line. Then, without a word, he reached for the laptop, brought the cursor to the Restore Access button and clicked. But only one account reactivated, Bethany's. He paused for a moment, hovered over the others, then closed the laptop gently and returned the phone to his ear. "I unlocked Bethany's," he said. "Yours and Dad's can wait." Linda didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just said, "Okay." "I need time," Jacob added, voice even. "I need to see something change." "I understand," she replied, and this time, he believed her. They didn't say goodbye. The call ended, and Jacob sat in the dark, staring out the window at the falling snow that had finally begun to cover the roads in full, hiding the paths behind him and the ones ahead. He could see his reflection faintly in the glass, older now, scarred in ways only he could measure, but no longer invisible. No longer begging for love disguised as obligation. He didn't know if healing would come. He didn't even know if it should. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the house was on top of him anymore. It was behind him, and maybe, just maybe, the next time he walked into it, he wouldn't be looking for approval. He'd be looking for truth. He opened the laptop again. The dashboard glowed softly. The camera would have held there on his face, on the cursor, on the unclicked accounts, as if waiting for the ending that would never quite come. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't what they did, it's what we have to do in response. Do you think Jacob did the right thing? Or did he become what he hated? Either way, the screen stayed quiet. And we never saw if he clicked again.